Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. We are going to get started with the patterning video now, so we're going to hop right into it. You can use whatever tape you'd like to use. I like to use duct tape personally. You do not have to go with like a super tough duct tape. Honestly, I just go straight to Walmart and buy whatever the cheapest duct tape is. You don't have to use anything too strong, but also don't use anything too weak. So I wouldn't say use masking tape, as I have tried it before, and painter's tape. It's just not my favorite. The taping process is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is make sure to tape up your base. You can tape up the entire base, but because I work on symmetry and how symmetrical the base turns out to be, you can just tape one side, which is what I do. One thing I will say, make sure to leave some space around the eye. This is going to be important for later when you're adding the eye lining. Once you have the base all taped up, this is where you can begin the patterning process. So here I'm starting out by making the markings of the character. You can obviously look at your reference sheet. Just make sure the markings are as large or as small as you want them to be, and stay true to whatever your character has going on. And you can obviously change the markings if you need to. Just take a piece of tape and then go over it with the marker. After you've gotten all your markings down, this is where you're going to start making sure you divide the pieces into what you need them to be, making the little arrows for the fur direction, making the letters for the color of the fur, and just making any markings that will make it easier for you to identify when you start cutting out the pieces and putting them together. The way that I like to divide up my lines is by going around rounded edges and making corners connect with each other. This way I can just line them up and I don't have to make a bunch of little darts or those little tick marks that will line them up eventually anyway. So this just makes it easier for me to process it. And if you're following this tutorial, there's many ways you can do this, and I'll show you a little example later on of those little darts that I'm talking about. This is just a close-up of the little tick marks that I make, so when I line these pieces up later, I'll know exactly where they go, since they aren't pieces that are connected to a corner. At this point, this is where you're going to cut out your pattern. I like to take old magazines or craft paper, whatever I have on hand, and this is where I'm going to be placing the pieces, make darts as needed. And what I like to do is take those pieces and put a number on both the base and the tape so I know exactly where they go, and I can refer to the guideline that I make by tracing along the edges. This guideline makes the process 10 times easier when trying to put all the pieces together, and something you can refer back to. As you see right here, I am making the dart on the piece as I'm trying to cut it off because sometimes it's just easier and some pieces will be a lot quicker to take off if you just make the dart as you're trying to get the piece. And the goal is to make the piece as flat as possible. Whether you're using a sewing machine or sewing by hand, I like to sew my faces entirely by hand. I wouldn't recommend more than ½ an inch of seam allowance as you want as little excess fur as possible when putting it together. And when cutting out dart, you want to make sure that there's no seam allowance at all. After cutting out all the pieces, sorting them, making sure they have a fur direction, a number, and a color code, you now go through the process of tracing it out on your fur. Here you'll see me cutting these large chunks into smaller chunks, not individual pieces, as this is just going to make it easier for me to pre-shave the pieces, which is something that I highly recommend you do if you are planning to shave the suit. So here I'm going to provide a list of the shavers that I use, and I'll link them down below if it's something that you can purchase. I use a range of shavers as they all serve a different purpose. The ones that I'm using right now are for the purpose of taking off the bulk of the fur. So this is not me trying to actually shave it down fully. This is just to make the process a lot easier when sewing the pieces together. It's important you don't shave the edges down. If you have a long piece like this, you can just trim it off, but make sure to leave just a little bit of fur hanging off because it helps with the blending process afterwards. If you have two pieces that are different colors and different markings, that's when it's actually good to take the edge pieces off because it'll just make the process easier when trying to make the markings really stand out. When all the darts are sewn together and everything is trimmed the way you like it, this is where I start to do the sewing process and combining all the face pieces. I like to do the markings first, especially the smaller markings, and then I'll do the bigger markings and then start to put everything together. Once you have all the pieces connected, this is what it should look like. You should have a front piece and a back piece, and they should be connected at the top center. So don't connect the sides yet because that's going to be important for how we do the gluing process. So if you are following this tutorial, you'll notice that I saved the nose patterning and ear patterning and cheek patterning for last. This is really just personal preference, and sometimes it just helps and saves time for, material use and whatnot. So this is just part of my process, and you can do this a lot earlier in the stages of making your suit. So you'll see here that I'm putting the minky inside the ear and putting it on before I'm even gluing the rest of the suit. This is important because this is just how I do the process for this part of the suit, and having the excess minky around the edges that are not glued down is going to be important for when I sew the ear to the fabric. Once you have that cheek fluff on, everything is connected, you are now ready to move on to the gluing process and finishing up your fursuit head. Hopefully you found this video helpful and educational, and remember to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!